And joining us for more on tonight's topic is Marcus Lindemann, a professor of marine biology at State College of Florida. And joining us by Skype is State Representative Larry Ahern of northwestern Pinellas County. He is the sponsor of a House bill which would have required Fish and Wildlife to see whether manatee speed zones are needed. The bill was killed in the subcommittee during the legislative session. I want to thank you both for joining us. And Professor, let me start with you. What really does the difference between endangered and threatened mean?
An endangered species, by the definition under the Animal Protection Act, means that the species is in direct threat of extinction, on the brink of extinction, while a threatened species, by the definition, is possibly able to go endangered. So it is a level of severity.
And why does that mean that there is a link or not a link between how these animals are protected?
Well, the Fish and Wildlife Service has discretion as to what measures on the federal level are being kept in place to monitor and protect both endangered and threatened animals.
Right.
It's more a matter of the psychology behind it. An endangered species that is put on the endangered species list will gain a lot of resources and a lot of attention because this is a species that, by definition, we are about to lose permanently.
Right. Representative Ahern, let me ask you this. Does the change in status impact what you believe is the necessity for having these no-wake zones or speed zones on our waters?
Well, it shouldn't. It might, though, as we go forward. I guess my biggest dilemma with them was that the agency, FWC, with the full knowledge of the recovery of the manatee population, continued to go forward over the last year to implement more and more speed zones throughout the state. And in some cases, in my area, was closing certain bays where boaters like to use it to recreationally, so that they're out of the channels and in a safer area. And with the closure of some of those, it was really going to create a situation where there might even be some safety to the boaters as they have to now gather in certain areas that would normally be just a few, spread out. They're all being kind of pushed and compacted into one bay or two bays when there were 3 or 4.
But what is the problem with taking all possible precautions in terms of protecting these animals? They are harmless to us. They are lovable. We see every year, and I believe we have some video of this, of manatees that are injured and killed by propellers from recreational vehicles. And these mammals are everywhere in terms of our waterfront.
Oh, absolutely. And no one is talking about removing anything. Again, they're implementing more here in Pinellas County, in our waterways. Another, I think, 13% will be no wake zones, even with the knowledge that, the population is recovering. Nothing, like I say, it's actually going forward. So nothing has stopped them, while they are supposed to take into consideration, as a species recovers, some maybe removal here or there. But that's what the study was for. That was all the bill was about, was let's see how effective these speed zones are. And while we're doing it, let's get a good count and find out where the manatee are, because no one wants to go back towards an endangered species, for sure. We want to just make sure that they're protected in the environment where we find the most of them, and at the same time, balance.
Right. Professor, and Representative, if you could hold on 1 second, because Professor, you have some thoughts about that.
Yes, one of the problems with locating the manatees is that changes in the local conditions, weather, sudden rains, which we've had yesterday, will change the location of manatees in an unpredictable manner. So we can say, yes, this is an area that manatees frequent very often, but it only takes one change in weather, which we are all aware of, that we cannot predict very well, to have them move in a completely different area. One other thing that has not been mentioned so far is the fact that Florida is a tourism state. We live by the tourist industry. That is true. But we have had record numbers of people coming down here, which also increases the number of boats. So now we have an increased manatee population, and we have an increased number of boats.
So in your opinion, do we need more speed zones, or?
I wouldn't necessarily say we desperately need more speed zones, at least not until we know whether the increased manatee numbers and the increased numbers of recreational vehicles actually lead to more manatee deaths.
And Representative Ahern, let me ask you, if you cannot definitively say where these animals are likely to habitat or where they are, then how can you accurately count them and therefore determine where these zones should be or not?
Well, that's what we tasked the agency to do. That's one of their jobs, and we know that there's certain places where they do they're more abundant, let's say, than not. Homosassa Springs and certainly in some of the marinas and bays. We know where they tend to go because there's seagrass there, places for them to feed. And all this is saying is, let's just make sure that we're not overdoing it, so to speak, when it comes to, and even the professor agrees, we don't need more speed zones, and this study would tell us just how effective speed zones are or aren't. I mean, it's the on the list of things that are most dangerous to the manatees. It's at the bottom of that list. I mean, red tide is the #1 problem, and
Actually,
and why we don't study that a little bit more, I'm not sure.
Still, over a third of all deaths occurring due to impacts with recreational watercraft. So it is a very significant number. Another problem that you brought up with red tide
that's
is...
not the information that I have.
Representative. I'm
Well,
sorry,
that's not
you
the
were saying?
information I have. I have red tide
another of the problems he brought up
killing
is
300 and 400 a year, and more in some seasons when it's more severe. And boat strikes are average at about 100. So I'm not sure what information he's going on.
I did not hear any of the things he said.
Let me ask you this. Is this a unique situation, given the nature of the manatee, that we don't have exactly the same kind of situation with other mammals and marine life in terms of their proximity to our waterways?
Well,
and
one of the biggest problems stems from the fact that we actually do not even know exactly what constitutes a healthy population for the manatees. We've had a 500% increase in numbers. But by the point in time where we actually put the manatee on the endangered species list, we had pushed them to the rate of extinction, and before then, we had never established a count for a healthy population, because historically we have been hunting them for meat and also for trophies and their hide. So to say that we know definitively that now they are out of the endangered zone is a bit of an assumption, a very strong assumption.
All right, Representative Ahern, let me ask you this. Why was your bill killed in the committee in terms of what rationale, and what is the likeliness that it's going to come back in the next session and be successful?
Well, it wasn't really killed in committee. It just died there, as they do sometimes when a bill's not moving a companion bill in the Senate. So there just wasn't any appetite, let's say, at this time for it in the Senate. But I think with, if we proceed, and I don't think there's anyone is proceeding with more speed zones, although, again, we're already under that gun. But I find it curious because no one says there's no open season on manatees. It's not, people aren't hunting them now for any reason whatsoever. And we're not going back to that. In fact, I'd be directly opposed to any possibility.
And I appreciate that, Representative. And Professor, thank you very much. That's all the time we have for him.